Welcome to Love Thy Lawyer. I'm Louis Goodman. Today's guest needs no introduction. He may be the most famous living legend attorney in America. Tony Serra represented Huey Newton, the Hells Angels, Ellie Nessler, Judy Barry, and Raymond Shrimp Boy Chow, among many others. He recently took on the government in the ghost ship fire case here in Alameda County. At 87 years old, he is probably the oldest still practicing litigator, certainly in California and maybe in the country. He served time in federal prison for taking a principled stand against paying taxes during the Iraq War. He's been portrayed by actor James Woods in the movie True Believer. He has famously taken a vow of poverty. And a little-known fact, I have confirmed with him that he actually served as an Alameda County Deputy District Attorney in the early days of his career. Tony Serra, welcome to Love Thy Lawyer.
Well, with an introduction like that, I'm starting to love my lawyer. But I don't think many do.
Well, a lot of people do love you, Tony. You have managed to create a career that, if nothing else, it is a career of principle, and you are someone who, in my view, has always very authentically represented your interests and the interests of your clients.
A lawyer is not supposed to place his personal belief system, his political perspective, his social ideology ahead of the client's. We're not here to use the client as some kind of a vehicle to get a political message out that, we, the lawyers, believe in. So I've never tried to do that. What I've tried to do is adopt myself to the political position of the client, see it the way he saw it, walk the last mile with him. And probably that's one reason why a lot of the clients, respect me, like me, because they know I'm in it for them. And the proudest words that I court in my profession and, serve with undying loyalty is not guilty. That's what I want to hear over and over again.
Tony, where are you talking to us from right now?
From what we call Pier 5 law offices in San Francisco.
Now, you're originally from San Francisco, is that correct?
I'm one of those rare native indigenous citizens, yes.
Where'd you go to high school?
At Lincoln High.
You were quite the athlete when you were at Lincoln High.
I was an athlete in high school, and I did pursue athleticism, or whatever word you want to call it, in college. In college, for instance, I boxed, I played baseball, and I played football, but I was making a transition in my psyche and in my, overall philosophy of life. And I was taking a lot of graduate courses in poetry and English. I was a philosophy major, an epistemology, major within the field of philosophy, English minor. And so I was starting to get intellectualized. I was starting to get politicized, and I put that above playing sports because they often came at the same time.
You went to Stanford, is that correct?
Yes.
How did you decide to go there?
They, how would I call it, solicited me. I come from an upper, lower class. My father worked. He was in the union. Brought home the check. I got good grades in all through school. I could have signed with the San Francisco Seals. That we didn't have the Giants then. Right after high school, and they would have put me in their farm club at Yakima, but I obviously was going to go to Stanford. They were paying my way. I was actually on a scholastic scholarship, not an athletic grant and aid, but a scholastic scholarship for my previous grades, and then, grades that I got at Stanford.
After you graduated from Stanford, you went to law school at Berkeley. Is that correct? At Cal Berkeley?
I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a poet. I wanted to be a world traveler. So as soon as I graduated from Stanford, I to Morocco, and a lot of expatriates were there. There was a big kind of intellectual level, people writing and publishing.
Where in Morocco did you go? What city?
Mostly in Tangier. But I traveled throughout because I rented a little car and slept in the back seat, and I traveled throughout Morocco, went up into the hill country, went into the desert, went to Casablanca, went to, other cities in Morocco. I've always loved Morocco for some reason. People are really friendly there.
Well, I've been to Morocco, and I just loved it. I spent about 6 weeks there and traveled all over the country.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. So how much time did you take off between college and starting law school in Berkeley?
I would say roughly a year. Then at Berkeley, in law school, I did real well. I think it was like number 11 of a class about 320. So I said, well, this is easy stuff. And I took off another year, and I traveled from Europe to India, sleeping in the desert, going at night because it was 120 during the day, seeing camel caravans along the way, going through Iran, etc. So then when I came back, I resumed going to law school, and ultimately, as we've talked, made application at the district attorney's office.
When did you first start thinking about being a lawyer, where you first said, hey, law school, being a lawyer, that's really what I should be doing?
It was when I was in Morocco, when I knew that I wasn't fitted to be there because I was a jock. I didn't even drink coffee until I was 27, or tea, and they were all doing heavy drugs, man. Like good people, good minds, whatever you want to call it. Idealistic, journalistic, but doing an awful lot of drugs, heavy drugs, bad drugs. And therefore I knew at that point I'm going to do something different. I'm not going to hang out here. And I thought I'd go to law school, but this was in my mind, absurd. As I look back, absurd, that I wanted to be a mafia lawyer. I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to then go back east, I have brothers. We were all San Franciscan, but I have brothers, 2 brothers who went back to New York. I could go back there. I could work with the mafia. I don't even know why the hell that was in my mind. But somehow it was, and it's absurd. And, much later in life, I represented mafia. I did a big case in Miami, did a case in New York for mafia. They wanted me kind of to be their house counsel. I remember saying, hey, man, I'm a hippie from California. I'm a free spirit. I love you, but I'm not going to work for anyone, including the mafia. And, came back to California to the beginning of the Haight-Ashbury. I was there. I was part of the Haight-Ashbury. I was there every night. I became my athleticism background made me like a freak dancer. Oh, I would dance in front of the stage. You can remember all of the hand gestures and all of the rock and roll and all of the freaky dancing and whirling dervishes. I would bring an extra set of clothes with me, put it in a car, because when I came out after about 5 hours of rock and roll dancing, I was completely wet with perspiration, so I had to change my clothes. But it shows you, how, passionate the 60s were in terms of the music part of it.
Now you were famous for your criminal defense work. I would like you to explain just a little bit about how you got into the Alameda County District Attorney's Office and what you did there.
Yeah. When I graduated from law school, and I had done well, so I could probably, get a work at any dimension of law practice. But what I wanted to do, always wanted to do, and I don't even know why, was jury trials. Somehow the appeal, of the peer group in terms of a serious judgment caught my imagination and my passion. So I went around to all the public defender's offices in the Bay Area, and they, in essence, said, no, we put you on the counter for the first year. Oh, meaning that you will be interviewing police, interviewing witnesses, interviewing victims, that kind of important, but it's not what I wanted to do. I want to be on the counter. So then I went around to all the DA's office, and I got the same thing from San Francisco. No, the first year you're not going to go to court. So the only county that said, we'll put you right in, Tony, into court. That's where I wanted to be. I didn't want to be writing briefs. I didn't want to be, on the counter. So I went with them, and for 11 months, I, prosecuted, mostly misdemeanors, mostly very short trials, day and a half, 2 days, something like that. But I had 34, 35 jury trials in that 11 months. So in terms of my peer group, I was, years ahead of everyone. So after that, I took another trip. I've had a lot of nice trips in a homemade camper on an old truck. I went along the Pan American Highway, and there's a few places you got to go by boat, and took a year off to visit, the Mexico, Central America, and South America. And I did get all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, and then I did come up the other side. So I saw a lot. So then when I came back, I opened my own practice. Haight-Ashbury was just starting then. It was so fabulous, to be there right at the beginning and see all of the music that was being created. And they, I can't say they, but parts of the Haight-Ashbury were turning toward the east. They were bringing in the philosophies, of pretend Hinduism, and the gurus, appeared, and people lived collectively, and there was a form of religion practice. And out of that context, which kind of Buddhistic mentality, I took what you call a vow of poverty. And, I said to myself, I'm amongst a peer group that will never let me starve. These are good people. And for some reason, I came from a lower class. I never valued money. Somehow it's just something in me, some peculiarity. And quite the opposite, I don't respect people that do whatever they do merely for money, for profit. So I took a vow of poverty that I would never make, like a profit off the practice of law.
At some point, I think your really first big public case was the Black Panther Huey Newton case. Is that correct?
Well, to get that case, I did others that were, serious.
Right.
Murder cases, things like that. So I was qualified. But absolutely, that's the one that gave me a national reputation. And, I used to sleep in the Black Panthers houses in Oakland and in San Francisco. They thought they were going to be raided. They had been raided back in Chicago. I think Fred Hampton had been killed. And so I would sleep there at night, waiting for the police to come. They never came, thankfully. But that's how I met Huey. He was always there. He would be, they had a paper that, they generated there in San Francisco at their place. And so I got to talk to him, and we became very friendly with him. And Huey was not a racist, so he had no problem with the so-called white representing him. And he befriended youth. I mean, he wanted to be surrounded, at least in terms of litigation at that early period, he wanted to be surrounded by idealistic youth.
And you fit the bill as idealistic youth.
Yes. So, yes, that was like a big one. The courts were packed. It was like being in church because the courts were all packed. And I'd pretend I'm crossing. Yeah, you did that, didn't you? And I could hear from the background, and you tell him, Tony, right on, Tony. You know, like they were commenting. They couldn't be stopped. It was so beautiful.
How is actually practicing law met or different from the expectations that you had about it, and how have those expectations transformed over the years?
The second question is easy. I haven't changed. I still embrace, the ideology, dare I say, of my youth. I remember I was back in Washington or something, and a tourist bus pulled right in front of me, and they yelled out the window for some odd reason, "Hey, man, what tribe are you in? What tribe?" Because I looked like an Indian when I was young. Maybe born there. I'm old. I don't know. And I looked up and I go, "San Francisco hippie," like that's what I belong to. And so, it shaped my whole life, and I adopted more or less the better portions of the idealism of the 60s, and I've retained it ever since. So what's different than what I expected? Sadly, I expected to go to New York and be a mafia lawyer. But that was quickly changed to being kind of the best. I was the best pro bono lawyer, Pro bono means you don't get paid. You're doing it for goodness sake, etc. So I always kind of believed that unexpectedly I became the best pro bono lawyer. And I can remember being in San Francisco and you want the public defender? No, we want Tony Serra, because they know I come in like a public defender. And as a consequence of doing that, I've come to deeply respect public defenders. They're overworked, they're underpaid, they're not appreciated. They get too many cases they have to deal out. They can't go to trial on everything. They don't have the resources. And they're up against the government with unlimited resources. So I've been a champion of the public defender's offices.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. I am holding up a copy of your book. The name of it is Tony Serra, The Green, Yellow, and Purple Years in the Life of a Radical Lawyer. And it's a book that you wrote while you were in federal prison. And I'm wondering if you could explain what you mean by the green, yellow, and purple periods of your practice of law.
Okay, just as a preface, while I was doing 10 months, the last time I was in for being a tax resister, they don't take my license because it's a matter of protest. I wrote 3 books and published 4, a book on poetry. So that was one of the 3. And what that purports to be is a metaphoric narrative of my career. So the green years are obvious. It's obvious is when I was young. I was green. I was just starting. And I give an account of my cases and my belief system during that time. Then, in the midlife, it's the yellow. It's the time to harvest. It's the time, when you are most respected. Your cases become more noteworthy. I'm traveling all over the country doing various trials. I'm traveling all over the country making speeches. So those were the yellow years. The purple years are the ones, say, man, getting older, not as active as I used to be, taking on too many cases just to prove myself that I can still do it. But I see that darkness, is on the horizon. Darkness means, in this context, it is the image, of death. So the purple is what precedes, the last of your life, so to speak. But I did all my cases in metaphors. Like I say, I'm in court, and green. I'm making this up now because I don't remember what, but it was like this: green butterflies. I faced the jury. I opened my mouth, and green butterflies flew out over, the heads of the jury. That kind of stuff. So I made I call it chromatic type of interpretation. It means a color interpretation of my career.
I got to say, Tony, that this is one of the most interesting books by a lawyer that I've ever read. With your permission, I'm going to read a paragraph right out of the book having to do with the Huey Newton Black Panther trial. You say, green had dominated the trial. It had infiltrated darkness. We sent green radiance into the black hole of the judge's bench. We ensnared the prosecution with vines. I stood in the court on mowed and unmowed grass. It was a rush, an unstoppable force, a core of life, thrust, an energy of the green sea, the green earth, the green planet. Huey Newton's trial for me was my first experience in harnessing the green force that underlies all life on earth. I've never seen a lawyer write like that about a case.
Hey, I don't know if this be good or not. You've never seen a lawyer smoke as much dope as I have. There's something.
Well, one of the things that I found really interesting in reading this book was that you have fought against the system your entire life. And ultimately, I think in looking back, you can really say that to a large extent, you were really right about things, about marijuana, about the overreach of the government.
About the grand jury, about the informants, about mandatory sentencing, all of those things I protested over a life, career as a lawyer. I still protest, and as you say, one by one they are fading or being knocked out.
Yes, and I think at the end, I read this whole book, by the way, and at the end of you really talk about the power of the government and how if you were a private attorney and you went to a witness and tried to bribe the witness with money, for example, you would be committing a criminal offense. But the government is able to bribe their witnesses with shorter jail sentences, not going to prison, things that are way more valuable than money, and how that corrupts the system. And I just think the way you spoke about it was, I don't know, just very, it really impressed me, the way you spoke about it.
Well, it's something I feel every day of my life, practically. The overwhelming, power that resources bring to the federal government. And, we who defend are really kind of stripped of that and very vulnerable.
You recently had a case here in Alameda County. Much of your career has been in Alameda County, the ghost ship case. And there were a lot of things that made that case very interesting from a sort of legal, societal point of view.
The issue is, why was that case meaningful and significant? And it's because of the tragedy, man. So many people died. Beautiful young people, the best there were. These were young people who were idealistic. That was the first time around. And the victim impact was so compelling. We were almost all crying. And the judge says, I'm setting aside the plea. I can't go forward with it. The family doesn't want it. And they want to see him, go to jail for a long time. And so the plea was set aside. We did go to trial. The case turned out better than we had hoped. And I think everyone who touched that case at any level came away with a form of, chronic despair, serious kind of psychic impact.
What do you think is the best advice you ever received?
I think it's important to have heroes, to have role models, to have images of people whom you respect and seek to emulate. And that's really important for your own spiritual growth. On the other hand, you learn from them by their example. You seek to practice in a way you believe they would practice. George Martin McGinnis, I don't know who remembers him, he died young, but he was like a Shakespearean actor in court. Oh, he looked at the jury and he espoused poetry. Every case was, part of his closing was poetry. And boy, when I heard it, my whole mind prickled up, and that's what I want to do. So it's not like he said, Tony used poetry, you will win them all. But you learn, from example and then apply it, and then it becomes part of your modus operandi. And it's not derived from some lecture, it's derived from watching it in action.
If a young person were coming out of college and thinking about a career, would you recommend going into law?
No.
Why?
Several reasons. You got to be goddamn strong. You're going to be attacked physiologically, not attacked by a person. I'm talking just your well-being. You're going to suffer, from physiological, psychological. You're going to, make enemies. You're going to be renounced. It's a tough life. I have 5 kids. None of them are lawyers. They're all, artists or, making movies and things like that, things that operate on the other side of the brain. And so law, first, it's this very high stress. And then secondly, my God, it's hard to win a case. The prosecution has all the advantages.
If you had a magic wand, there was one thing in the world, the legal world or otherwise, that you could change, what would that be?
Oh, it's so easy. Death penalty. Of course. My God, how many times have they ascertained, now mostly through DNA, that they've executed the wrong person? How many times? And beyond that, death penalty has no validity. It isn't more economic. It's more because it costs so much, takes 20 years, to finish the appeal. It's more costly than life without.
You brought up the subject of economics. Here's a question that I often ask guests, and I really even wonder whether I should ask you this question, but I will. Let's say you came into some real money, let's say $3 or $4 billion. What, if anything, would you do differently in your life?
Understand this. I've taken a vow of poverty.
I know.
It's real. So I couldn't take the money. I probably would give it to charity. I probably would deflect it. That is, I wouldn't say no because I can use that to help people. So I probably would give it all to a charity. I wouldn't keep it. I'm taking a vow of poverty. A guy with a vow of poverty with $1 billion? That's absurd. And nor do I want the money, nor do I give a damn about the money. I've never cared about money. I'm known for old suits and whatever you want to call it, the old cars, and I live very frugally. And I don't want your goddamn money. When they give you money, they want something out of you. There's a hook, man. But let's say there wasn't. What I would do would be give it away.
Is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't touched on?
Yeah. something that's going on in this country that's exciting and beautiful, and it is Black Lives Matter movement. I think that's the strongest thing that's come along in a long time. In attack on racism, anti-Asian hate crimes, those things are in vivid display now. The racism, So Black Lives Matter and a movement there. It's the biggest thing, I think, since Black Panther Party, Black Panther Party really was for the betterment of the Black people. And Black Lives Matter has to be for the betterment of Black people. And maybe all people, that are subjected to death penalty. At any rate, that would be, my view.
Tony Serra, thank you so much for joining me today on the Love Thy Lawyer podcast. It has been a pleasure to talk to you today.
Louis, thank you very much, and I've learned something from you. That means when something's profound, smile at it. You've got a smile that beams out, from your face that I can see.
That's it for today's episode of Love Thy Lawyer. If you enjoyed listening, please share it with a friend and follow the podcast. If you have comments or suggestions, send me an email. Take a look at our website at lovethylawyer.com, where you can find all of our episodes, transcripts, photographs, and information. Thanks to my guests, and to Joel Katz for music, Brian Matheson for technical support, Paul Roberts for social media, and Tracy Harvey. I'm Louis Goodman.
Marijuana's legal, so I can talk about it. There's something in marijuana, for me, not everyone, that stimulates imagination. That stimulates, your ability to juxtapose ideas and theories and, factual data. So it's been very good for me in that respect.